I'm Frank Kane, guest host today, standing in for Sean Evers, on a day when oil is more or less flat at around $106, having pulled back from the sub $100 level a few days ago. Over the next 30 minutes, we'll explore the reasons for that volatility and try to see where it will go next in the company of three experts in the field. So I'm going to go from west to east in terms of time zones. In the far west, we have Richard Radolia, Chief Executive Officer of Matrix Global Holdings over there in sunny California. Ahmed Mehdi, Research Associate at the Oxford Institute for Energy Studies in London, in red hot London, as I read. And right on my doorstep here in Dubai, in the UAE, we have David Rundell, former Chief of Mission of the US Embassy in Riyadh and author of the recently published Vision or Mirage, Saudi Arabia at the Crossroads. Now, hold on, purely by coincidence, just a couple of days ago, this arrived for me by Amazon. So there we are. We have an actual copy of it. David, I'm sure that your agent will be in touch with me later for the plug fee. But I want to start with some discussion about the ongoing repercussions for oil and international affairs, indeed, of the Biden visit to Saudi Arabia a few days ago. Let me go first to Richard over there in California. And Richard, I think it's fair to say that there has been a mixed press in the USA for Joe Biden's visit. There was a New York Times opinion piece yesterday that compared it to the Munich appeasement meeting in 1938. And today, the Wall Street Journal opined that the president's overall standing, opined about the president's overall standing. Has Biden lost? He never had it, they answer. So give me the view from California. How did this go down amongst Americans?
Let me give you a fist bump just to start the call off. I think
there you go. Yeah,
that's the proper way to do it here. I think you didn't also mention that Stephen Colbert, the #1 late night host, also turned on Joe Biden last night. And so, this really is a slope that he has been on. I think this is just another spadeful of dirt that they're kind of tossing on the road in front of Joe Biden. I don't think that he has really anything that he can do. People see through, I think, a lot of what this Saudi meeting was about, which was really nothing. I think that he went over there. He said time and time again, "I'm here to meet 9 of the GCC countries, and I'll talk to this MBS around the table and see what he has to say." We're a divided country. You know that, right? We are a country that is divided in many different ways. We're divided geographically by the coasts. The coasts are different than the people who live in the middle of the country. We're divided economically and ideologically. And I believe one of the great ideological divides we're in right now has to do with energy. And that anything that is positive for energy, anything that says energy in a good, that talks about energy, there's a divide. And the divide is oil bad, green energy good. And that's it. Unfortunately, you can't get around that the majority of the people, even people who are on the kind of on the left side of the aisle, they also have to pay $5.50 for gasoline or higher here in California, where it's $6.25 or higher. Biden's press secretary came out today and was taking credit for gasoline being down 50 cents. I didn't take any credit for the market being up $3. And so what we really have here is a problem. We have a problem with a media that is trying to talk about a green agenda and a supply-demand balance, which is anything but really beneficial for oil. And here's an important statement made today. The U.S. Energy Advisor, a guy named Holstein, he came out today and exactly what he said. People have to understand that we are transitioning and that we cannot have energy companies making a 30-year payout. Let that sink in. Let's try to unpack that. Here is the first time in my life where we're talking about an energy demand curve rising, and we can talk about that in a little bit. An energy demand rising, but we have the major government of the of the world saying we are not going to put any of our political or really our financial power behind the supply side of the equation. And what that's going to cause is a real problem. It's causing it now, and it's going to cause it later. And I think that's what we can talk about. But right now,
Okay.
Biden really found himself. He had an off day today. He was not in public in the last 2 days. He's been out of the public's eye. So I think that gives you a sense of what they're trying to do to regroup.
Okay. But on balance, it sounds to me as though this trip was pretty negative for him in US perception and has done him no good at all for the midterms. I mean, let's see where oil prices go after this. But is that fair?
It's two things. It went wrong way both ways. On one side, he was seen as he was giving into the pariah, as he called him, right? As he was giving into a pariah state. So on the one side, he gave into the pariah state, and on the other side, the people who are looking on the kind of let's get U.S. back in the energy game. He saw us going to them asking to increase oil production when you can't get a permit to drill in certain parts of the United States.
Yeah. Somebody said he would have been better off going to Texas rather than Riyadh.
Correct.
Yeah. David Rundell, let me go to you to get some kind of reaction from the Saudi viewpoint, because there were no big policy announcements, no big deals, were there? So how do you think the visit is being viewed now in the kingdom after a couple of days to think about it? Was it a failure because there was no real substantive progress, or was it a success because of the symbolic fist pump and the idea of recognition of MBS?
How would I say this? These things are very carefully choreographed, and therefore there shouldn't be any surprise. The negotiations should all have been taken care of. You don't really expect the president and the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia to negotiate some deal in an hour.
No,
so they're there to sign what's already been negotiated. What I had said and written before the visit was that it's unlikely that we're going to see major changes in any of the most prominent issues. I didn't expect any great breakthrough on the Arab-Israeli agreement peace process, especially as Israel doesn't have a government now. I didn't really expect that there was going to be any kind of an Arab NATO, particularly in light of the fact that Saudi Arabia remains unpopular in the United States, and you could never get something like that passed in the Senate. I didn't think there would be any great breakthrough on Yemen, because the Saudis more than anybody else want that war to end. You don't have to send the president of the United States to tell them it's a good idea to end the war in Yemen. They wanted to do that. So I didn't expect a lot on any of those issues. What I did expect and hope for, and what I said made the trip worthwhile, both for the Saudis and for the United States, and really made it worthwhile for Biden to take the political heat that he was inevitably going to have to do, was that it would be a first step in the rebuilding of an important strategic relationship. That it would be the beginning of a long process to rebuild what I consider to be a very valuable relationship for the United States. And that really didn't happen. And that disappointed me.
That didn't happen.
It did not happen. No, I don't think it really happened.
Let
me tell you why. I mean, let's be clear. Biden did not go big. Okay, in Texas, we have a saying: you go big or go home. What he should have done, what I would have advised him to do, was to get off the plane. And people say that Biden wasn't met by MBS. I would imagine that was an American decision, that was not a Saudi snub which I've heard people say. I would imagine that was because they didn't want a photo op of Biden shaking hands at the airport with MBS the first thing he arrives. For whatever reason, he didn't shake the guy's hand. All right. He does this fist bump thing. I mean, come on, if you're going to go there and you shake hands with his father, why don't you shake hands with him? So that was just, he didn't go then. And then what does he do? The first thing he does is he starts lecturing MBS on Khashoggi. Is that going to rebuild the relationship? Those are sops to the human rights advocates in the United States. What I would have done, he
was playing to the home audience there.
Well, he was playing to half the home audience, because there's a lot of other people who in America think, I understand that we have moral values that we need to protect, but we also have interests. And right now our interests are getting able to buy gasoline and avoid inflation, and that the Saudis can help us with that. So it's important to rebuild the relationship. So how do you rebuild the relationship? Well, what I would have said, look, I'm coming here. I'm going to take a lot of heat from the New York Times anyways, regardless of what I do. So I'm going to stand up and I'm going to say, MBS has told me that he accepts responsibility for the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, and he has assured me that nothing like that's going to happen again, which in fact he has done.
Yeah, he has. He's already said that. Yeah,
exactly. And also, I'm here to tell you that there's a lot of good things happening in Saudi Arabia. Vision 2030 is a profound social and economic change that's happening in Saudi Arabia, and the United States ought to get behind that. And by the way, I've invited Mohammed bin Salman to come to the White House next year to talk about how the United States can advance Vision 2030. Now, had he done all that, which he could have done, and taken no more heat than he's taken as it is, he would have begun to rebuild the relationship, which is
interesting.
What I hope. But he didn't do any of that. So I think
that's a good point.
All he managed to do was annoy everybody, which is kind of sad. And somebody said, I'll leave one last point on Biden. So I think it was Richard said, they threw more dirt in front of him. I would say, no, they threw more dirt on his grave.
I was going to say that. I felt that was a little too politically incorrect.
Look, Biden will be
exactly
finished. Right. At the midterms, Biden will be finished. Okay. There's no way he's going to lose control of the House, maybe the Senate. So he's not going to be able to pass any more of his legislation, regardless of what the senator from West Virginia does. And he won't run again in 2 years.
Yeah,
so,
I get it.
I mean,
let's talk about what it means for oil policy, Ahmed Mehdi, because one definite thing that did come out of the meeting was a statement, as I understand it, from the Crown Prince, that the kingdom would get to 30 million barrels a day of oil by 27, but that's it. After that, the kingdom won't be able to increase capacity any further, he said, quote. Now, I think that this is new. What do you think? And what are the implications for Saudi oil policy and that of OPEC Plus going forward from this position? The next meeting is on August the 3rd. What do you expect from that?
Yeah, good morning, Frank, and co-panelists. I mean, that was, I mean, typically you've seen historically US-Saudi relations where, you remember in the early 2000s, there was talk about increasing capacity up to 15 at one point, even talking about that at certain stages.
But that's been ditched now, has it, with this latest?
Well,
statement?
I think just to go back a minute and talk about just to sort of echo the comments made by Richard and David, I think that in terms of the choreography of the meeting and what was going on in the market, and actually what are the sort of the red lines, so to speak, of Saudi oil policy, and whether they would be thrown under the bus for the sake of for political expediency. I think some myths need to be dispelled. Number one is that question in the market was, what actually could be the Saudi maximum sustainable production capacity in the context of any requests for an output hike. And, regardless of the number, whether it's, 11 that's sustainable or 12 that's sustainable, or, so really we're playing with fudging those numbers, whether it would be, they can actually increase by 1 million on a sustainable basis. I think realistically, the market is already buying the argument that in terms of Saudi messaging that that figure of 12 is what the sustainable capacity is. So the question is, does Saudi want to test that and potentially give away that valuable information in a market whereby actually there are so many different views on balances. OPEC's numbers are out by 2 million barrels a day on demand growth compared to the IEA this year. So really looking back and keeping hold of what the data is saying. And also, by the way, Saudi was certainly more vindicated on what the Russian output losses would be compared to Western agencies. They haven't been as large as what was initially predicted by the IEA, for the first half of the year. So really, we're still dealing with these, uncertainty in the outlook for balances this year. In terms of the Saudi oil policy, the other thing is that it would always take place, and I always believe this, that it would take place within the framework of OPEC Plus. That you have seen Saudi, take hold of a unilateral output cut, but that was within the context of the COVID demand uncertainty. In terms of actually Saudi deciding to actually do something with outside the framework of OPEC Plus, that was always quite fanciful. So in a way, actually, Saudi is already on the road to increasing output in the coming months, with its quota target. But I think another point is that something that perhaps has not been picked up as much, and I think, by the way, the article in Bloomberg today is completely wrong, which says that Saudi exports are up because of China. They're not up because of China. They're up because they imported a record amount of fuel oil, and that allowed them to free up more crude for export.
And some of that came from Russia, didn't it?
And some of that came from Russia, absolutely. Yeah. And you're seeing a lot of Russian fuel oil heading to Fujairah, and actually you're seeing stocks there, and that's putting pressure on other players. And so the flows that are changing are super interesting right now, and pricing as well. And you're getting perhaps that development towards that two-tier market, not just in crude but in products as well. But just my final comment on your question is the point about where it's really about it's not the final say. The point is that you still got this, as Richard said, this growth in primary energy demand, but really fundamentally on crude oil demand growth year on year. The call on Saudi crude is expected to grow in the short term, but then beyond 2027, these decisions, these aspects need to be taken into consideration, and what the trade-off is going to be between Saudi production capacity and spare capacity. And so there's a multitude of factors, and it's not just a matter of what's happening now. You've got to look, long term.
Okay, let me just briefly stay with you, Ahmed, and pose another one. Well, the other members of OPEC Plus, let's leave Russia aside for the moment, but big producing countries like Nigeria and Iraq, who haven't been meeting their quotas, for months now.
Yeah.
Can they increase?
It's a good question. I mean, what's been priced in, and I think this has been the challenge really in the last several months for OPEC, is obviously that underperformance factor, where it reached up to 2.4 million barrels a day, but beyond. Obviously, you have to account for Russia in terms of what its target is. So there needs to be some discussion on baselines and targets at the next meeting, in my opinion, because they're wildly out of sync with the underinvestment during the COVID cycle, but more importantly, what's happening. I don't think that the discussion needs to be about necessarily Russia at this stage, because quite frankly, Russian output remains, it's down a little bit, but it's fundamentally. I think actually Russia and OPEC Plus still remains a strong bet going forward. I think on terms of Iraq and Nigeria and underperformers, yeah, absolutely. West Africa, you're seeing the sort of, certainly places like Nigeria, a sort of migration from onshore to offshore. You're seeing some IOC exit withdrawals, and that's a theme common to both countries, actually, the sort of IOC confidence in upstream performance. I would say the biggest challenges for both countries, particularly Iraq, really is in the absence of a budget, and there's been political deadlock now for close to, what is it now, 9 months, no government in place, a caretaker government which has no ability to allocate resource, a political kingmaker, Muqtada al-Sadr, who's withdrawn from the race to use that as leverage to really mobilize the street. It's a very volatile political environment. And to add on top of that, a topic that's really not talked about because it's quite a niche market is actually Mediterranean. The Mediterranean is a great cauldron of geopolitics right now, because you've got Libyan volatility on flows, you've got Kirkuk and KRG crude, which is traded by the trading houses as prepayment cargoes. They're now being clamped down on by Baghdad, and on top of that, you've got sort of redirection of flows from Urals in Russia to the Med. So you've got this cocktail you know, that's quite explosive.
Yeah, the dynamics are changing, aren't they? Richard, I want to just stay in the Middle East and Central Asia for a moment, because we had Putin's visit to Iran just recently, where they signed a $40 billion MOU to develop oil and gas fields in Iran. Of course, these are two big enemies of America, aren't they? You know, what's the view from America about this kind of development, where it seems to me the US can't do anything to affect this at all? You know, they can't change this at all, can they?
No, well, again, this comes back to the U.S. policy. Every major investment bank, every major private equity group is sworn off energy investment, and I think we're seeing a shift. One of the comments: the West is going to have a real tough time here. We've printed our way into oblivion. We are now saying we don't want to invest in commodities. We have a $40 billion investment from Russia to Iran. The EPA had let a formaldehyde license lap, and the three largest LNG exporters said, "Wait a second, our turbines run on that. How can you do that?" And so you have a U.S. policy that's looking into the rest of the world with its heads in the sand. We don't care. We let everyone else go invest in oil and do these things. And I think we're going to find ourselves in a world of hurt. We're going to trade oil independence to mineral dependence. And if we have dollars that have less value to them, and you have Russia with China and Iran and others putting huge amounts of monies into commodities, and you have energy demand rising, well, how's that going to work? You know, how we've never been here, everybody. David will agree, but Ahmed will all agree. We've never been in a situation where we see demand rising. We're talking about margins on the, we're on the margin here, a million here, a million there. What happens when we get to 103 million barrels, 104 million barrels of demand? What are we going to do? How are we going to stop the price from going up? We have a refinery problem in the United States. We're running at 97% or 95% capacity. And every day our government says to the refiners, why don't you lower the price? Biden said literally, lower the price at the pump. You can't make it up. And so I think that what you just said about the Middle East and Russia and China, I think there's this divide. There's a divide of what's real, which is we're going to spend $40 billion to help Iran bring natural gas online. And then on the other side, our transportation secretary says everyone should buy electric cars. So I think it's a real disconnect.
Right. David, just as a kind of aside, how do you think the sight of Russia and Iran becoming more pally, especially in the energy field, how will that be viewed in Riyadh? Because the Russia-Saudi friendship alliance has been a big part of the OPEC Plus thing, the main part of it, really. Do you think the Saudis will be distrustful of Russian attempts to get closer to Iran in energy?
I don't think they will welcome it, but I think that it won't really affect their own agreement in OPEC Plus. I think OPEC Plus is something they worked hard to achieve. So I didn't think that they would, they would abandon that. I would make just, if I might, two quick comments. I'm not 100% sure what's going to happen with oil supply outside the United States or even in the United States, regardless of all these investment banks that are being disincentivized. I understand that, and I agree. I agree completely with Richard that neither of us are ever going to be asked to talk on NPR because we don't sing the right song. But Permian, where I produce, is we're at record highs. Rig count, I can't get casing. And that's people like me. I don't go to Morgan Stanley to get the money to drill my wells. So, I don't know. I think that there are plenty of people in America who will respond to high prices. We always say in Midland that, the solution to high prices is higher prices, and the solution to low prices is lower prices. I'm not 100% sure that America is going to completely walk away from increasing production. The government's going to try and make that hard, but eventually the American people may wake up and realize that this green fantasy is precisely that. Okay. The other thing I would just say quickly about, because you asked me about the trip, and that is that the one thing I think that Biden could have done, and I should have mentioned this, what he should have done, he should have talked about food and fuel security. Those are real problems for a lot of the world. They're going to get worse. And that's going to cause instability. It's already causing instability in Sri Lanka. It's going to cause instability in Pakistan. It's probably going to cause instability in Egypt, even in Panama. And that's going to be a real headache. And this is both food and fuel because the prices are correlated, but particularly hungry people go to the street. He could have stepped up to the plate. Again, he could have stepped up to the plate and said, you know what? America produces a hell of a lot of corn, and we're using 40% of it to put into ethanol, which is really just a sop to corn farmers. And the fact of the matter is we could get that ethanol even cheaper from Brazil, where they make it out of sugarcane. And the reason we don't get it from Brazil is because I got a tariff on imported ethanol. So I could still use the ethanol, but people can't eat sugarcane. They can eat corn. Okay. So he could have done a lot.
Food was mentioned, vaguely in the
token. He said, I'm going to, he said, I'm going to spend 100.
Yeah.
To be precise, he said, I'm going to spend $100 billion on green energy and $1 billion on food security. I mean, really? 1%? Come on. That was a joke.
Let's move to Europe if we can.
I got one last thing to say, and that I keep saying it. One last thing, but giving people foreign aid to buy more wheat when you don't increase the supply of wheat is just going to increase the price. Not going to do anything to make people less hungry. Just going to make the wheat farmers happy.
Okay, good point. Good point. I want to get some comments in from Europe, please, where Ahmed is. He's there in sweltering hot London, where if we needed to see the effects of climate change, I guess 40 degrees plus for the first time in the history of the UK is quite a symbolic thing. But it's going to be significantly cooler in months to come, isn't it? I've seen the cover of The Economist from last week. Europe's coming winter peril, where they're looking at a scenario where Russia completely cuts off gas supplies to the continent. Europe announced a deal with Azerbaijan just recently to bring more gas from there. I don't think that will make up for the lack of Russian gas. And just today on Bloomberg, Putin said that he is ready to supply Europe with as much gas as it needs, although there might be problems with this Russian turbine that was sent to Canada for repairs. There might be problems. I mean, that could be just cat and mouse. But I would like to, in that theme, one suggestion that seems to have been gaining some traction recently as a way of stepping up pressure on Putin while mitigating the effects on global energy markets is the idea of a price cap on Russian oil. Some policymakers seem to like the idea. Oil industry experts generally say that it's impractical and unworkable. So I want to make that the focus of our survey question for this week, please. If you could call up the survey question. Irene, I'm sure you're there. So President Putin said just yesterday that the idea of a price cap on Russian oil was a crazy idea and that prices would skyrocket if it was applied. On this issue, Putin is, and just choose one, please. On this issue, Putin is right or Putin is wrong. While we're digesting that, Ahmed, tell me, you know, you're there in the inferno of London.
Yeah,
you know, what's the view on the coming winter?
well, as you say, this week we'll see what happens with Nord Stream 1. I think in any case, it's unlikely to return if it does to its, you know, it's below capacity, you know, near 160 million cubic meters a day. But maybe, I think for people I speak to in my gas team suggest that perhaps, you know, at a reduced rate, it may return, you know. And by the way, even if that, you know, the whole issue of Canada, even if it does return, it's not going to return by the time maintenance finishes. So you've still got this issue. But I think the bigger picture really is, you know, perhaps unlike crude, you know, on the gas supplies, you know, there's no other outlet really for Gazprom. So there will be, I think, and they do lose money, you know, lose money on these gas export revenues. So fundamentally, I think there will be an interest to return at a slightly reduced rate. You know, obviously, you've been seeing some of the forecasts in terms of the impact on GDP, and with all likelihood of, you know, Europe entering recession in you know, towards the end of this year.
Germany in particular.
And I think that the ECB has a difficult situation with regards to, you know, raising interest rates as aggressively as other central banks because of you know, what's happening, particularly places like Italy as well. I think for German chemical manufacturers, there's also concerns, you know, going back to Richard's point on green deals as well. You know, the gas crisis is also having ripple effects, or, you know, across industries where, you know, chemicals play a big role in green manufacturing as well. So there's complications for the long term. I think really this is designed to sort of test European unity. And I think actually the price cap, if anything, is kind of a symptom of that confusion that taking place in policy quarters, because it doesn't make sense. It defies the fundamental principles of the market. It's, you know, it doesn't learn from historical lessons where you've tried to do something similar, like even the Iraq Oil for Food program, which was tarnished by corruption and middlemen. And, you know, it's assuming a perfect universe, which is A, it can be policed, B, that what actually the band at which you set a price cap is also, you know, sort of doesn't make sense. And also it assumes that you won't get any kind of unilateral cut from Russia as well on production. So there's many, I mean, I can spend an hour talking about the price cap.
Let's see the survey result, can we, please? Can you pull that up? Oh, right, that's closer than I thought. So 60% of Gulf intelligence participants endorsed the Russian president. Sorry, on this issue, of course. But a surprisingly large 40% believes that price caps could work, it seems to me. What, Richard, David, what's your view on this issue? Please be succinct because we're running out of time.
I'll just make the quick one. We used to have back in the, if you made in the late 70s, we had offshore, onshore oil. You know, if you remember that, and basically if you had domestic produced oil and offshore, and there was a $12 difference, and basically a lot of people went to jail for it. So I'm not sure if I think Ahmed is exactly right. It can't be policed.
Okay, David, what do you think? Price caps.
I think price caps are, you know, antithetical to, or antipical. What's the word I'm looking for? Antithetical.
Antithetical.
Yes, exactly. They don't work because they are against the market. They are not market oriented, and to the extent that the oil market, you know, we have a global oil market, so I don't see how that's
oil is a market. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, look, guys, thank you very much. I think it was a really interesting discussion and a wide grasp of views, as well as a geographical spread that we've had. So really interesting. Thank you very much, Ahmed, David, Richard. I think we have the last Gulf Intelligence podcast of the season tomorrow, where Sean will be back, and then there's a summer break. So I hopefully will see you all after the summer break. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Frank.
Bye.
Take care, guys.
Take
Thanks a
care.
lot.
So Ahmed.